They thought she was just another passenger, just another face in the crowd, someone they could mock, dismiss, and forget the moment she stepped onto the plane. But in exactly 9 minutes, their world would turn upside down. The airport buzzed with its usual chaos, a blend of hurried footsteps, overhead announcements, and rushed conversations. Among the sea of travelers, Kiana James moved with quiet confidence, her sharp black blazer and silk scarf exuding an effortless elegance. She wasn't looking for attention. She never did. But she knew, from experience, that it would find her regardless. The moment she reached the check-in counter, the shift was palpable. The friendly smiles that greeted the previous passengers faltered, replaced by something colder. The young woman behind the counter, her name tag reading Maddie, barely concealed her surprise. Her eyes flicked from Kiana's face to the first-class ticket in her hand, as if struggling to reconcile the two. "Good morning," Kiana said smoothly, sliding her ticket across the counter. Maddie hesitated, just long enough to make a statement. Her fingers brushed over the ticket, flipping it as if something might be amiss. "Flying first class today?" she mused, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes," Kiana replied, unbothered but keenly aware. Maddie turned to her colleague, Bryce, a tall man with a buzz cut. "Hey, can you check this? Just making sure everything's legit." Bryce chuckled, holding the ticket up to the light like it was a fake bill. The people in line behind Kiana began to murmur. The weight of their stares pressed against her back. She remained silent, her expression unreadable. "It's fine," Bryce finally said, shrugging. "Guess she's good to go." Kiana took her ticket without a word and moved toward the luggage drop-off, where another staff member grabbed her suitcase. Without care, he flung it onto the belt. It teetered, then slammed onto its side. A smaller bag fell, its contents nearly spilling onto the floor. "Excuse me," Kiana said, stepping forward. "Could you handle that with more care?" The man barely glanced at her. "It's just luggage," he muttered, scooping the bag up with one hand and tossing it onto the belt. Kiana inhaled deeply. She knew this game, knew it well. She straightened her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, her tone cool as she walked away. At the gate, the pattern continued. The agent, Phil, scanned her ticket as if it required extra scrutiny. "First class, huh?" he muttered. "Must be a special occasion." Kiana met his gaze. "Every occasion is special." Behind her, another agent whispered to a colleague. "Bet she won some sweepstakes. No way she paid for that herself." The word struck like a slap, but she didn't flinch. Dignity was her armor. She stepped onto the plane, the tension following her like a shadow. The flight attendants greeted others with bright smiles, but when their eyes met hers, the warmth faded. One of them, Claire, stopped her. "Ma'am, may I see your ticket again?" Kiana arched a brow, but handed it over. Claire examined it longer than necessary. "You're in 2A, correct?" "Yes, just making sure everything's in order." Kiana's patience was wearing thin. "It is." Claire pursed her lips, but stepped aside. Kiana took her seat, exhaling slowly. Outside, through the window, she saw it, her suitcase. The luggage handlers tossed it carelessly onto the cart. One of them lifted it high, then let it fall with a loud thud. The zipper strained against the impact, nearly bursting open. Kiana pressed the call button above her seat. A flight attendant, Rick, approached with an air of irritation. "Yes, ma'am." She pointed outside. "That's my luggage. They just dropped it." Rick barely glanced. "It's just a suitcase. It'll get where it needs to go." Kiana's jaw tightened. "It's my property, and it should be handled with care." Rick sighed, unimpressed. "I'll make a note." She rose to her feet, her voice steady but commanding. "If this is how customer concerns are handled, I'd like to speak to your supervisor." Passengers nearby took notice. A man in a tailored suit muttered, "She's got a point. My luggage was trashed on my last flight with this airline." Rick's smirk faltered as murmurs of agreement spread. Cameras emerged, capturing the scene. Kiana saw it happening, momentum shifting in her favor. Claire, sensing the growing unrest, stepped in. "We'll make a note of the incident," she said hastily. "I assure you it'll be addressed after landing." Kiana said nothing but returned to her seat. They weren't done facing her yet, not even close. As the plane leveled off, whispers drifted from the flight attendant's station. "She's probably going to file a complaint," Claire sighed. Rick chuckled. Maybe she should have stuck to coach if she's so worried about her precious luggage. The words weren't meant for her to hear, but she did. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. They didn't know who she was. Didn't know that in a matter of minutes, their dismissiveness would come back to haunt them. Kiana's fingers brushed over the phone in her pocket. Not yet. Timing was everything. Justice was patient, and so was she. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, but Kiana barely heard it. The weight of prejudice was already pressing down, familiar, yet no less infuriating. She had felt it from the moment she stepped onto the plane. The attendant who had served her water without a word reappeared, this time collecting meal trays. She skipped Kiana's row entirely. Across the aisle, a man had been watching her since boarding. Middle-aged, salt and pepper hair, an expensive watch that gleamed every time he moved. Finally, he leaned slightly toward her. "Excuse me," he said, voice low but clear. "Are you traveling for business, or?" Kiana turned, expression unreadable. She knew that tone, the unspoken question behind it, the doubt, the curiosity about her presence in first class. She had encountered it in boardrooms, elevators, lounges. "Busy," she said simply. No explanation, no justification. The man nodded, studying her a moment longer before retreating into his seat. The silence left behind was heavy with unasked questions, but Kiana had no interest in answering them. She unlocked her phone, scrolling through her emails. One subject line caught her eye. "Acquisition completed. All systems go." A slow smile curved her lips. Satisfaction flickered through her, brief, like a breath of fresh air in a stifling room. The world was about to change, and they had no idea. For now, she was still just a passenger in this cabin, a woman surrounded by people who underestimated her. The most blatant insult came later. Kiana stood to retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment, a leather case containing essentials. She had just reached for it when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Ma'am, you can't block the aisle." Rick, one of the flight attendants, stared at her with barely concealed impatience. Kiana met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm just getting my bag. I won't take long." Rick folded his arms. "If it's not urgent, I'd appreciate it if you waited until after service." The dismissal in his tone was clear. A power play. Kiana hesitated, not because she was intimidated, but because she was deciding how much of herself she wanted to show. Finally, she stepped aside, her voice smooth as silk. "Of course." She returned to her seat, watching as Rick walked away, his posture rigid with smug authority. She exhaled slowly. Soon, he would understand just how misplaced his superiority was. As the flight prepared for descent, Rick returned, this time holding a passenger feedback card. "We like to get feedback from our first-class passengers," he said, his voice cool. He handed Kiana the card without looking at her, then immediately turned to the man across the aisle, his demeanor shifting. "I hope you enjoyed your flight, sir." Kiana's fingers curled around the card, the paper crinkling under her grip. The irony was almost laughable. They wanted her feedback, yet they had never shown her the same courtesy they so freely gave to others. As the plane touched down, the cabin erupted in polite applause. Kiana remained still, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Outside, the city skyline came into view. Inside, the game was about to change. When the plane reached the gate, passengers rushed to retrieve their bags. Kiana took her time. She stood gracefully, her bag in hand, and walked down the aisle with quiet confidence. She felt eyes on her, the subtle shift in energy as she passed. People were watching, some curious, some wary. She stepped into the terminal, her phone buzzing in her hand. A single message. "They're ready." Her lips curled into a faint smile. "Now it begins." The baggage claim area was a sea of movement, passengers searching for their luggage, families reuniting. But Kiana's eyes were locked on a small group, standing near the conveyor belts. Airline executives, their suits crisp, their shoes polished. At the center stood Michael Hayes, the airline CEO. Kiana walked toward them, every step measured. As she approached, their conversation faltered. Michael turned, and the moment he saw her, his expression shifted. "Miss James," he greeted, extending a hand. "An honor to meet you in person." "Likewise," Kiana replied, shaking his hand firmly. Her voice carried a quiet authority that demanded respect. Behind Michael, she spotted them. Rick, the attendant, and others from the flight. They watched with growing unease, exchanging uncertain glances. Bryce, the male attendant, shifted on his feet, his jaw tight. Maddie, the woman who had avoided serving Kiana earlier, clutched a clipboard like a lifeline. Michael turned to them, his tone formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Miss Kiana James, the newest majority owner of this airline." The words landed like a thunderclap. Maddie's mouth fell open. Bryce took a half step back. Rick's face drained of color. The realization hit all at once. Kiana let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of the moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but laced with steel. "I understand there was some confusion today about who I am. Let me clarify." She took a step forward. "This morning, I was treated with disregard. My first-class ticket was questioned. My presence was met with skepticism and dismissal. It wasn't the first time I've experienced such behavior, but today, it will be the last." Rick opened his mouth, but Michael spoke first. "Miss James has brought this matter to our attention, and we take it very seriously. His gaze hardened. Effective immediately, you are all suspended from duty pending a full review. The air went still. Maddie's eyes brimmed with tears. Bryce clenched his fists. Rick's jaw locked, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Kiana watched them. She didn't gloat. There was no need. Justice didn't require celebration. It required action. As the attendants were led away, Michael turned to Kiana. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Kiana gave a small nod. It's just the beginning. She checked her phone. Another message. Press conference confirmed. Let's make it count. She exhaled slowly, walking toward the exit. This wasn't just about today. It wasn't even about her. It was about the countless others who had been dismissed, disrespected, and underestimated. But not anymore. The game had changed, and Kiana was the one holding the board. Imagine walking into a space where you rightfully belong, only to be met with doubt, dismissal, and outright disrespect. Now, imagine flipping the script and taking control of that very space. This isn't just a story. It's a reckoning. Kiana James stood at the center of the executive boardroom, her gaze unflinching. The air was thick with tension, a room full of high-powered individuals shifting uncomfortably under her piercing stare. Apologies had been offered, but Kiana knew better than to accept empty words. This wasn't about one incident. This was about dismantling a culture built on bias, about reshaping an industry that had failed too many for far too long. The door creaked open. Maddie, Bryce, and Carl, the airline crew responsible for the morning's debacle, entered, escorted by HR. Gone was their earlier arrogance. Instead, they stood small, eyes cast downward, the weight of their actions now fully realized. Silence stretched. Kiana let it linger, let it suffocate. Then, with deliberate precision, she spoke. Do you know why you're here? Maddie shifted, her voice barely above a whisper. Because of what happened earlier. Kiana nodded. Be specific. Carl exhaled sharply. We didn't treat you the way we should have. Her eyebrow arched. And how should you have treated me? More silence. Then, at last, Maddie's trembling voice broke through. With respect, like any other passenger. Exactly, Kiana said, her voice like steel. But instead, you assumed the worst about me. You questioned my right to be in first class. You mishandled my belongings. You made it abundantly clear that in your eyes, I didn't belong. And why? Because I didn't fit your expectations. Bryce opened his mouth, but Kiana shut him down with a raised hand. Don't. This isn't about your intentions. It's about your impact. The weight of her words crushed the room. No more excuses. No more justifications. Just the undeniable truth. Kiana turned to Michael Hayes, the airline CEO. I trust you'll take the necessary disciplinary action, but this goes beyond them. This is systemic. Training alone won't fix it. Leadership has to set the standard. Michael nodded gravely. We're implementing comprehensive diversity training immediately. This will never happen again. Good, Kiana replied. But words mean nothing without action. The crew members were dismissed, their departure marked by the echo of retreating footsteps. But Kiana wasn't done. She had a message to deliver, and the world was waiting to hear it. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists whispered, cameras flickered, and the weight of the moment filled the air. Then, Kiana stepped onto the stage. The murmurs ceased. Every eye locked onto her. She stood tall, exuding power and grace. Good afternoon, she began, voice steady. I stand before you today not just as the new majority owner of this airline, but as someone who has experienced firsthand the deeply ingrained biases that too many travelers face. This morning, I was dismissed, condescended to, and disrespected, not because of anything I did, but because of assumptions others made about me. Silence. A heavy, potent silence. This was not an isolated incident, Kiana continued. It was a symptom of a much larger issue. And that is why we will not simply apologize. We will change. Effective immediately, this airline will undergo a full-scale review of its policies, with a focus on accountability and inclusivity. Discriminatory behavior will not be tolerated. Not from staff, not from leadership, no one. The room stirred. Skepticism mixed with admiration, but no one could deny her resolve. Training will be mandatory, she continued. But training alone isn't enough. There will be consequences for those who fail to uphold the standards we set today. This is not just about my experience. It's about every passenger who has ever been made to feel small. That ends now. A beat. Then, the room erupted. Applause, camera flashes, murmurs of approval. Kiana had done more than deliver a statement. She had issued a promise. Michael Hayes joined her at the podium. Your leadership and vision are exactly what this airline needs, he said. Kiana met his gaze, then turned back to the sea of reporters. This is just the beginning, she declared. And with that, she stepped away, her presence lingering even after she had disappeared behind the curtain. Outside, the city pulsed with life, the golden hues of late afternoon casting long shadows. Kiana's phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. "People are calling your speech groundbreaking." She smiled faintly. "Good," she replied. "Let's make sure it stays that way." She moved forward, heels clicking against the pavement, blending into the crowd. Just another traveler. But within her, the fire of change burned brighter than ever. And this was only the beginning. Kiana stepped out of the car, the soft hum of the city wrapping around her like a familiar melody. The hotel entrance gleamed under the warm glow of lanterns, casting long shadows across the polished pavement. The doorman met her with a courteous nod, his white gloves crisp against the dark night. Without breaking stride, she returned the gesture, her mind still replaying the events of the day like a film reel stuck on repeat. The moment she entered the lobby, the cool air embraced her, offering a stark contrast to the weight of the last few hours. The grandeur of the marble floors, the soft murmur of guests, and the clinking of glassware from the nearby bar should have been comforting, but she was far from relaxed. She stepped into the elevator, pressing the button to her floor, watching as the golden doors slid shut with a quiet finality. Once inside her suite, she exhaled deeply, slipping off her blazer and draping it over the back of a chair with deliberate care. The city sprawled out before her, a vast sea of lights shimmering like tiny stars on Earth. It was a city that had seen her underestimated, dismissed, and now, it was a city that had watched her reclaim her power. For a moment, she simply stood there, her reflection blending with the skyline beyond. The weight of the day pressed against her chest, but beneath it all, there was something stronger, a quiet, unwavering resolve. Her phone buzzed on the sleek glass table behind her. A message from Michael Hayes. "Your vision inspires us. Let's keep flying higher." A faint smile touched her lips. The words weren't just a courtesy. They carried promise, a recognition of the shift she had ignited. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed a simple response. "We will." Together, she set the phone down and moved to the small bar in the corner of the room, pouring herself a glass of water. Lifting it slightly, she whispered to herself, "To new beginnings." As the night deepened, the city outside transformed into a constellation of movement, each glowing window a story in motion. She settled into the plush chair by the window, her thoughts steady, her mind already weaving the next steps in the change she was determined to see. The world wasn't perfect, not yet. But today, she had pushed it one step closer. And tomorrow, she would push again. Meanwhile, across the city, Bryce sat in an unfamiliar office, the weight of his actions catching up to him in ways he never expected. Dressed in his best suit, he clutched the armrests of the chair as the interviewer leaned forward with a piercing gaze. "Can you explain why you left your previous position?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. He had rehearsed for this, prepared answers, practiced his charm, but none of it felt like enough. His words faltered, his confidence cracked, and as he watched the skepticism deepen in the interviewer's expression, a sinking realization dawned upon him. The casual arrogance he had carried before was gone, replaced by something new and unfamiliar: regret. By the time he walked out of that office, Bryce knew the truth. His reputation had followed him, and not in the way he had hoped. The moment of disrespect that had seemed so small at the time had rippled outward, altering the course of his career. Assumptions had led to consequences, and now, he was the one being judged. Kiana, on the other hand, was ready to rest. The battle had been fought, the message had been delivered, and tomorrow, she would fly again. But this time, she wouldn't just be a passenger, she would be a force. The tables had turned, and justice had done more than speak. It had roared. Let this story serve as a reminder. Respect is never optional, and assumptions can lead to consequences more powerful than we imagine. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.